Okay, hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us for the panel discussion on diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. This session is particularly relevant considering the recent events in the United States, including the violent deaths of George Floyd and other Black lives, which highlight the systematic discrimination and racism persistent in the US and globally. The horrific events of the past several months confront us with the depths of ongoing inequity, discrimination, and bias. Also, the promotion of inclusivity and diversity in science is in our core of the Geochemical Society mission. We must redouble our ongoing efforts to provide an inclusive, supportive, professional environment free of discrimination and harassment. I would like to welcome all our panelists, and we have some who is hiring up to the panelists and will be, I hope, in a couple minutes will join us. But we have already all our invited speakers. And first of all, I would like to introduce also Adina Paitan, and we will start the interactive session by asking all the panelists one quickly question, and would like them to introduce themselves. And
before we do that, I just wanted to say a couple of words about how we're going to handle this panel discussion. There is more than 6 panelists on joining us, and in order to see the person who's talking, I suggest that everybody will select from the upper panel where it says everyone. Instead of selecting everyone, select view who's talking. If you do that, then you can see the person who's talking specifically if they have their camera on. In addition, all of the attendees are muted, but you can have the opportunity to ask questions when you type the questions on the chat note. And we can continue this discussion later in the Discord discussion room, where there is a discussion room dedicated for this panel and this session. So with that, let Maria continue with the introduction of the speakers, and we'll move on.
Thank you, Adina. With that, I would like to start the first round of very short introduction with our panelists, with our invited speakers. And we finished their first session with great discussion and a lot of great suggestions about one question. And I think that will be nice if we can continue. So after your short introduction, please share with us your thoughts about what is or will be the biggest game changer in increasing diversity and inclusion. And with this, I would like to invite maybe Rosie, you are on my screen right now, to start with a short introduction and answering this question, please.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Rosie Aligato, and I'm a associate professor of oceanography and sea grant at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the School of Ocean, Earth, and Ocean, Earth, Science and Technology. It's a very long name, SOEST. You know, these past few weeks have been incredibly transformative and revealing many of the gaps that are really, really apparent in science broadly and specifically in geosciences. It's been an opportunity for myself as somebody who directs a mentoring program for geoscientists who are transitioning from community colleges to four-year college and then hopefully onto graduate studies, to really challenge and reveal what a lot of you know, a lot of the things that we haven't been dealing with in science are. And so it's because of them, it's because of the students that I mentor, it's because of my family, because of my community, that I'm really 100% committed to the true work and really authentic, hard work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And can you please say a couple of words about the biggest game changer in increasing diversity and inclusion? Because you have a great suggestion in the first session, and it will be nice. Most probable we have a new audience right now, so it will be nice to kind of, to talk a bit. It was really great idea.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we have to do moving forward is that, you know, a lot of the people who have been around for a while, we know that the geosciences are dominated by white men. I think the best thing that can happen is if we listen, if we step back, and I'm going to borrow the words of what one of the other panelists said, is not only step back and listen and provide safe space for the younger junior scientists who are here on the panel and who are looking to make a difference, to enable them to speak up without fear of any kind of you know, negative impacts, and in fact to amplify these voices. You know, so I just wanted to provide one example, is that we are actually taking advantage of the fact that because of the COVID pandemic, our departmental seminar series is going to be totally virtual, and that means that we aren't held back at all by any kind of budget. And so we've made it a commitment, actually, in the Department of Oceanography to look and trying to specifically invite for our departmental seminars, so that our faculty and our students and our staff can really be introduced to new and emerging scientists. So that's one thing, you know, for example, one concrete thing that we're doing that both takes advantage of, you know, this negative thing that has happened with COVID, and allows us to really step into a space and make a commitment to amplifying what might otherwise be marginalized voices.
Okay, thank you so much. Kuheli, maybe you can continue with a short introduction and then answering the question.
Sure. My name is Kuheli Dutt, and I work at Lamont. I do diversity work at Lamont. I'm the diversity officer there. In terms of what would be possibly a game changer in the geosciences, so given that my area of work is institutional policy and is rooted in the heart of the institution, I think what would be a real game changer is if all hiring, appointment procedures were to become entirely transparent, have like large numbers, have community involvement, have like community voting on appointments and promotions. And once that happens, then immediately you check this knee-jerk tendency of affinity bias, which all of us have. And when the geosciences are, you know, not only very white male dominated, but when you look at the leadership positions, it's almost entirely white male dominated. And so that's a combination of systemic racism and affinity bias, which is the tendency to prefer people like ourselves. So transforming all procedures, search procedures and appointment procedures, to make them 100% transparent would hold everyone accountable and would force them to look at things that they would otherwise not have looked at or just viewed as being, you know, normal, which I think would definitely open up the field a lot.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And Rachel, can I ask you, please?
Hi, my name is Rachel Bernard. I am a visiting assistant professor in the geology department at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Basically, I was thinking a lot about this kind of game changer question from the first session, and what I kind of think is that I think the biggest game changer will be when people that aren't directly involved in diversity aren't the only people talking about it. So when I've been going to, HEU and GSA diversity sessions for years, and it is the same, 100 people in the room every time. I know people just from sitting in on those. And actually that kind of is really disheartening after a while because it's just the same people talking to each other, telling each other about their outreach efforts. So I think the biggest game changer will be when we start seeing, regular old geologists at R1 institutions showing up for these diversity sessions. And also, when you're on a hiring committee or in admissions, when it's not just the early career woman who brings up the issue of diversity. So I hope that, I think for our discipline to really improve, talks about diversity and inclusion need to be something natural that anyone can talk about and everyone cares about, not just the same underrepresented people or the same early career women. And I think that seems like it's happening. Yeah, so I'm hopeful.
Yeah, thank you so much. Besides, we lost our man on the way to the second session. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very, very important that the crisis going wider and wider, and the question is how we will get there. So how we will attract more people, and not only the people who really want to do that. So with that, I would like, Ree, can you please add your thoughts and also a short introduction?
Yeah, can you unmute yourself and turn the camera on just so we can see
Yeah.
you?
You can. You can.
Yeah,
hear
we
me?
can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have an image. Sorry, I was fast session. Yes. My name is Lee Hori. I am a professor of Department of Earth Science of Ehime University, Japan, and also now I am a position of head of department also. I'm geologist and paleontologist and geochemical analysis are also doing, and so busy. Anyway, and also I'm a diversity committee member of JPGU and also other head of diversity gender equality committee member Geological Society of Japan also. Anyway, so in Japan, they're quite behind. Every year, we organized JPGU gender session. Also, gender session every year regularly held in the Geological Society of Japan also, but not so same. Not so much interesting. So female attendance dominant, not so much male and diversity, but other nationality, not only Japanese, and other nationality employed in Japanese university is also institution. So they sometimes attended the diversity session, and they talk about what to say, more increasing diversity ratio in Japanese geoscience society. So what is important for changing this or fighting very disappointment situation. I think is first one is maybe we need more diversity members in making decisions positions. So, for example, when I in my university, I become a vice more high more than council member, and female used to be non council member, female council member, then become increasing up, and the university diversity increase, environment is much better. So it's one of the what you say, yeah, I think is so top down movement also important fighting for this so breakthrough or something like that, much increasing of the female diversity ratio. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, yeah, we're getting from bottom up and top down, and also some different activities. And I think it's a lot of different great ideas, which all can be. We can't exclude anything. And now I would like to welcome Margie. And can you please introduce yourself, and maybe it will be a little bit of repetition what we were talking in the first session, but most probably we have a new audience, and we are talking about the biggest game changer in increasing diversity and inclusion. And you had several great ideas we have heard.
Thanks. I'm Marjorie Chan. I'm a professor of geology at the University of Utah, and I'm excited to participate because I'm learning a lot from some of the other panelists, and there are such great ideas about transparency, amplifying voices, having broader participation in diversity issues. And to me, one of the big potential game changers is just the power of cyber technology. And we're in a era where social media and instantaneous information is available, and it's actually giving people new voices that didn't have those same voices before. And I think that that's going to make a big difference because it's bringing things to light, and you can't suppress things quite as easily because people do have this power of voice through the internet and through videos and all types of things that are available. And I also think that increasing visibility, when we dedicate a time aside, or we set aside, let's say, a year where we're going to focus on diversity and just bring in diverse speakers, or we're going to accompany that by changing some of the displays in our hallways that really focus on diverse scientists and diversity issues. One of the things that I always remember was I participated in a international congress several years ago, and the 3 top keynote speakers were women. And I remember some people, some of the men saying, "What's going on here?" And really they couldn't say anything because all the women were qualified, but it was so noticeable because it had never been that way before. There had never been 3 keynote speakers that were women. So I think the more that we can raise the visibility of diverse participants in whatever ways that are possible, it just keeps bringing it to the forefront. Thanks.
Thank you, Margie. Rocio, can I please ask you to take the floor?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rocio Paola Caballero Gil. I am a Peruvian geoscientist. I specialize in paleoclimatology and paleoceanography. I'm currently a postdoc at George Mason University. That's in the US, near Washington, D.C., more or less. I wear many hats. One of them is being part of an organization called GeoLatinas. And as I hear Marjorie and many of the ideas that have been put forth, I almost think of GeoLatinas immediately every time you all talk about, because we do use the power of social media in trying to put more voices, more diverse voices out there. And I feel like that is definitely something that can help us, move key pieces in trying to make real sustainable change for the geosciences. For a game changer, I almost feel like only when we actually can fuse the individual side and the institutional side in terms of the initiatives that we put forth, the actions that we try to do, and how do we keep each other in check, that's when we're going to involve other people who are not usually in the conversation and slowly turn the tide and make sure that we can sustain the change that we want to see. I think the real end game changer will be when we can think of science as the place to go and look for diverse places and voices and kinds of thinking. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you. That's a nice picture to see science as a place for a hotspot of diversity. I think that's great. Esmeralda, yeah, thank you for coming. Can you please introduce yourself and also give some thoughts about the game changer in increasing diversity?
Sure. Thank you, Maria and Adina. I really appreciate you all thinking about this session even well before this current circumstances and situation started. I'm Esmeralda Acefao Berhe. I'm a professor of soil biogeochemistry at the University of California in Merced. I'm also a co-PI in an NSF-funded project called the Advanced Geo Partnership, where we're trying to empower geoscientists to transform workplace climate to address issues of harassment, discrimination that occur because of gender, sexuality, race, and everything else that you can imagine. So my presentation focused on, in particular, representation of Black folks in geosciences and how, as Rachel's paper a couple of years ago demonstrated, how we've never really made any progress in the last 40 years, in spite of many efforts to recruit people, to fund student initiatives here and there, that the numbers in terms of who's holding geoscience positions is, in the academic workforce in particular, but generally speaking in the geoscience research community, have barely changed. They didn't really change at all in 4 decades. And so the main issue that we think is an important one that we have not addressed as much has to do with climate and workplace climate that actually pushes people out of geosciences. And in my presentation, I talk about how I really don't like this idea of a leaky pipeline, which somehow assumes that people are just dropping out of the geoscience workforce or educational community for whatever reason, because they can't make it or they're not interested or something like that. Rather ignoring the fact that there is significant amount of bias, discrimination, and harassment that folks tend to experience in our community, in particular Black and Indigenous people of color, that have been documented in many, many studies at this point. So based on that, I feel like myself and our team in the Advanced Geo Partnership, we're a collection of professors working with professional societies, including the Earth Science Women's Network, the American Geophysical Union, and as well as the American Women in Geoscientists. We aim to empower geoscientists to address harassment and discrimination. And I want to say 2 points to address the point that Maria raised, and I think 2 points that just complement what the other panelists have said. One is the fact that working on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in academic workspaces in general tends to be this thing that we relegate to the very few, particularly people who look like the folks that you see in this panel, women, early career, members of minoritized communities. But I think it's important to every once in a while to keep revisiting the tasks and the jobs that we signed up for, in particular in public institutions of higher learning, right? Our job, the reason why we get to do this work that we love and the science that we really care about is because taxpayers that come from a very diverse community pay their taxes to allow us to do this job. And hence, our jobs, by definition, are actually research, teaching, and public service. And serving and representing the public is not an afterthought. It's not something that I think we should do because we derive better quality science for it, even though that's a great benefit of diversity, but rather it's actually part of the job that we signed up to do. And second, I think it's important to recognize how big of an impact harassment and discrimination have on minoritized scholars in the academy. Toni Morrison put it really nicely when she wrote that the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reasoning for being. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. And so I think it's important to, in conclusion then, to address this distraction that prevents minoritized scholars from being able to do the job, from being able to stay in the academic community. And that has been documented by so many surveys and scholarly works at this point. And I think if we have to do one thing to change because of this moment, and the change that I think this moment demands of us, in addition to the other things, it's to finally address this climate issue in the way that it deserves to be addressed. I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Esmeralda. I think it's a great point, and I also would like to say that I had a look at their homepage, Advanced Geo Partnership, and I would like to recommend audience also have a look. There is a lot of different tools also for teaching, for communication. It's really highly recommended homepage to look at. So with this, I'm checking now the questions from our audience. We don't have so many, so I would like then to go to our questions first, and we will start again with Esmeralda. We have two questions to you. The first one, what is your opinion on how general, institution-wide and worldwide are the strategy to address the lack of diversity? And are there things that can apply universally? And what, in your experience, the greatest actually barriers from the department or university perspective? And the second question is maybe more on personal note. What helped you personally in the world that is actually lacking support and diversity? What keep you going?
Thanks, Maria. So in my opinion, in particular thinking about widely applicable, universally kind of applicable strategies that to help address diversity have to do with, one, having effective recruitment strategies that don't just, kind of keep, so as Coeli mentioned earlier, we all have affinity bias to people who share our backgrounds, people who share our, I don't know, the home institutions, if you will, for our PhDs or research groups, or even our scientific field. We have to constantly check ourselves and our biases, right? Recognize that we have a task to represent the science in the best way possible and make sure that everybody in our communities is getting the same chance for recruitment, retention, advancement, promotions, and awards, and everything else that this job entails. And I think, as I mentioned in my intro, if there was this one universally applicable thing that I feel like we keep failing to do, is recognize, first of all, I think when it comes to topic that in my presentation and race and racism and geoscience in general, we have to acknowledge that we don't even talk about issues having to do with race and racial climates as much as we talk about sexual harassment and gender discrimination, for example. It's not because these issues are not there, but it's because a certain segment of society has relegated them as some things that are not really universally applicable or don't have a huge impact. But the reality can't be further from that truth. These have huge implications for how people, who chooses to enter our geoscience community, and who's staying and who's actually receiving recognition in our community. So I think this workplace culture and climate issues that have allowed for this persistent underrepresentation of, in particular, Black and Indigenous people of color from kind of being part of our academic community is one that we desperately have to address. We have to do something about this. Otherwise, unless we're willing to acknowledge this, we can't really make progress, because there's even a recent study that highlighted that this climate issues and people being pushed out of our communities has way more impact than lack of people in the pipeline. So shortage of people from diverse backgrounds in the pipeline. So I think that's an important issue. And then if I was to come to what helped me, persist, if you will, right, really has to do with my community. And this includes a community of folks around me. I went to a graduate program in particular for my PhD that ended up being very difficult, because I encountered in particular one individual who decided, being who I am and what my background, with the way I look, I don't belong in their elite institution. And so there's this individual, and obviously with the individual with influence, that made it very, very hard for me to survive and thrive in that environment. And I don't think I would have even finished my PhD, at least not there, if it wasn't for the support of my mentors, including peer mentors and family support structure that I had at the time. And so I don't think there's any substitute for a strong support structure to help minoritized scholars succeed and thrive in academic institutions. And obviously, all of us need to work to have really great CVs that nobody can ignore or dismiss, right? But keep in mind that minoritized scholars need the distraction of racism to be removed from their workplaces and from their minds for them to actually be able to thrive. And so these things are related, but I think community networking, mentoring makes the world a difference, in my opinion.
Thank you, Asmeret. That was a wonderful answer. We have some questions from the audience, which several of them are related, so I'm going to combine them here. And these questions are for the younger members on the panel, specifically Rachel, Rocio, maybe Rosie. And the questions focus for Haley, you too.
Sorry, Adina, we also have one raised hand afterwards, yeah?
She already typed that, so that's okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the question focuses on what is the role of students and the younger generation in changing and transforming the atmosphere and the dynamics in departments and other institutions, and specifically also if having a mentor for from your own personal story, having a mentor or somebody to work with was useful, or was that part of the reason that you were so involved early on in your careers? And maybe we'll start with Rachel, then Rocio, then Rosie. And I'll turn my camera off.
Okay, so the first question is about how involved or how much of this work I think should fall onto early career people. I kind of ineloquently tried to convey this in the first session, but I think it's really hard. I think people should do work in inclusion and outreach if they're really passionate about it, which I hope people are, but I think too much of this work has fallen to early career people who are the least powerful, who have the least amount of time, and have the biggest risk in calling out their departments and societies, pre-tenured people. Yeah, I think even though maybe a lot of the energy is with early career people, I think that the more senior people in departments and in societies and in institutions really need to be leading this and listening to early career people, amplifying their voices so that they don't have to put necessarily their necks out there or spend all their time doing this diversity work, which might not even benefit them, in terms of getting tenure, getting a job. Obviously, I wish that this kind of work was valued more, but that's the truth. And in terms of mentoring, I have had great female mentors throughout my my education. Probably there's someone who so before I started my PhD, I kind of was a science assistant at the National Science Foundation, and all the program officers there were really kind of who motivated me to get my PhD, because I saw all these really passionate, enthusiastic people that had PhDs in the geosciences, which I hadn't really encountered before. So, and I kept in touch with all those people, Lena Patino in particularly, throughout my PhD, and it was really important for me to have her, because at times when I was working in my PhD and feeling like no one cared about what I was talking about, or no one's thinking that diversity is important and I don't have anyone to talk to, I could always call her and she could put things in perspective. So I think sometimes what people need a mentor for more than anything is just someone to listen to them who has the same values, who can validate their experiences. So.
Thanks, Rachel. Rocio?
I was getting lost in Rachel's words because they are so important, I think. Let me start with that. I feel like personally I'm here because of my mentors, both the good mentors that I had, the peer mentors that I had, because to me mentoring has to come from many angles, not just, the older, more experienced person, more advanced in their career, but also those around us that can be a soundboard that can provide some different perspective. And for me, I had many of them. Mostly peer mentors were female. Most of my mentors, official mentors, were male. I had my first female mentor like a couple years ago, maybe 2 years. Just started with her, and she's amazing, Linda Henop, and then I met other people at the same university who are also amazing. But it's because of the great mentors that I had that I couldn't fully use to almost put myself in their shoes, because they were not like me. It's also because of them that I get this energy to do the work that I do as an early career, hoping that we can together find mentors for people who are starting, who look like them, who sound like them, who they can relate in a perhaps more direct way. Not because you need those only, but because it does help to have someone who understands a little bit of your struggle from that perspective of struggle. And so mentoring to me personally is definitely what keeps you going. And again, peer mentoring is included there, not just the formal mentor-mentee relationship. In terms of the first question, early career scientists, and I'm including, pre-qualifying exam, post-qualifying exam, PhD students, master's degree, even undergrad students to some extent, because they're invested in this. We have the energy, we have the passion, we love what we do, we want to make the world better, and we still have that. I mean, all of us do, right? It doesn't matter what stage of career you are, but I feel like the early careers are the ones that have it like right there. And unfortunately, that's mostly probably why everything falls on us, because we want to do it. We can't wait for somebody else to step up to the plate and do it. And unfortunately, like Rachel said, we're the ones who don't have really the time. We're the ones starting our careers, starting our lives, starting our families. And so I think that at some point it would be nice to see more accountability on the people who are more advanced. And I know we're all busy, and I know we all have things that we care about. However, if we do feel like we actually care about diversity and inclusion and making a better climate, then we kind of have to do the work and not just wait for others at-risk population to do the work for us. So the answer would be, unfortunately, it does fall on the early career people. It would be great if it didn't have to. It would be great if it was more balanced. But yeah, that's the way it goes right now.
Thank you, Rocio. Let's just give Rosie a chance to share as well. And by the way, if you could mention a little bit about your work with the Indigenous communities, there were a couple of questions about that as well.
Sure. So, you know, I'm an associate professor in oceanography at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. As far as, I'll try and address the questions from multiple perspectives, because now I have tenure, but, you know, I'll try and think about it as I was coming up. I think the one of the most important things, and now I'm the director of a mentoring program that seeks to help students transition from community colleges to four-year institutions into grad school. So from the perspective of a director of a mentoring program, our goal is to create a nurturing environment for undergraduates in our school. And we do that by pairing graduate students with undergraduates. So it's near peer mentoring. And then we also, by having those cohorts together, we actually do work in the community. So we also organize community service days so that our students are also seeing that they do have a responsibility and that they are giving back to the communities from which they come from. And also so that communities can see them and see that we are training people who have expertise in issues that, especially for environmental sciences, for issues that are important to those communities. So I think, you know, having that kind of triangle between community, undergraduates, and graduates is extremely valuable. For me, I totally echo and stand with the other panelists that, you know, I never had a Native American or Native or Indigenous role model in any of the institutions that I was at. You know, I never had a Black professor until I was an undergrad at MIT. And my advisors, you know, I also had only male advisors until I was a postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley, you know, and I was a postdoc with Nicole King. But despite that, all of my advisors, I feel, were very lucky. I was very lucky that they never held me back, that they advised me and gave me really great advice and supported me. And when I moved back to Hawaii, ironically, even though I'm at the University of Hawaii, I was the first Native Hawaiian to be hired in the entire school of SOAS, which arguably is one of the largest geoscience you know, programs in the country, given all of the different, you know, diverse things that we are in. And I was the very first. And so as far as having other people to kind of mentor, I had to look outside my school. And so I looked to other Native Hawaiians in STEM, other Native Hawaiians who were outside of STEM. I looked to my own parents, who actually were professors in ethnic studies, as guide, you know, as guideposts and compass for how to navigate this really crazy situation. And I think the answer is that, you know, sometimes we do have to be the first and sometimes only, but there are always allies that we can rely upon. And it's completely important that we construct our own support systems. And that we to the extent possible, we try not to lose ourselves, and it can be very hard, because it means that you have to be pretty secure in your identity, and that's also something that's very hard to do actually in the sciences. Sometimes is to retain your identity as a minority, as an Indigenous person, at the same time as pursuing your science.
Thank you so much, Rosie. I think that we have one of the attendees raising her hand, Andrea Dutton, who was the panelist or the plenary speaker on Monday, and she actually started her talk by saying or sharing her thought about Black Lives Matters and what she feels we need to do. And if Maria, can you unmute Andrea and have her ask her question?
Yes. I think, Andrea, you can talk now. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time to continue it. And I want to personally thank all of you for the time and emotional energy that you put into this issue, not just now, but that you have been doing for a long time. And I hope more people are now noticing all of that effort and rewarding you for it. My question is that geoscience departments across the country often have halls with pictures of white men who have been the past chairs and directors, right? So-called halls of balls, which have been recognized as being very unwelcoming to people of other identities. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about removing those pictures to make that space more welcoming. So one aspect of that is what would you do with the space, but also does removing the pictures entirely sweep that history under the rug somewhat inappropriately, hiding it in a way that prevents us from recognizing that historical climate and context of the institution and the people in it that I think is important to the conversation. Thank you.
Marjorie, maybe you want to answer that first and then Asmaret?
Yes, I think that's a great point, Andrea. And to me, sometimes the halls have just been too staid and we haven't changed them enough and made them more dynamic by having change. And I'm in a department where we really focus on trying to put things that engage people on the walls. And so we use the halls and walls actually as teaching tools, and we integrate what's there as part of our curriculum. And I think that it would be great to still retain some of that history, which we can do on the internet because we've got that great resource, and anybody that wants to look up who were the past chairs could easily go online and we can have their pictures and their bios and such. But maybe now is a good time to really change a lot of what we're displaying and what we're showing, because it's an example and we have visitors that are coming through our halls and they need to see the diversity that's represented in our science. So I think you raise a really good point, and I think there's all kinds of opportunities to do some very neat things and actually incorporate what's on the halls and walls in our teaching curriculum and education. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Andrea. That's a pretty neat question. That's a very important point, I think, right? By choosing who we highlight and who we identify and how we amplify, their history, we tell a story, right? And so one of the many ways we can change these halls of old white men, filling them everywhere from academic institutions to the national academies and everywhere, is maybe to flip the script, right? And highlight the science, but not necessarily the sole individual who's being given recognition for that work. And this in particular, I think, can make everybody appreciate the history of the hidden figures in NASA, for example, or Rosalind Franklin, or many other women and minoritized scholars that worked with these folks, but never really got the recognition, right? So if it was actually about the science and not necessarily about these old white men who are the only ones who get recognition from the work, then that could be a big step forward, right? And the other way to think about it, in particular important from the geoscience perspective too, is, right, we can highlight the amazing geology that's right out there in the world. And then we could also use that opportunity to highlight indigenous knowledge on the geology and the soils and the ecosystems in general, right? These incredible things that we didn't just wake up and discover 100 years ago, but communities have known for a long time and even entrusted with and managed in very respectable ways and sustainable ways for long periods of time. And that could be another way we could be learning from history, right? Without necessarily just highlighting one gender and in particular one age demographic from one gender and one race, right?
Thank you, Asmaret. We have the question that we talked a little about in the morning session, and that's this kind of dichotomy of people that feel like they need to increase diversity and inclusion just for the sake of looking good or ticking the mark, and actually not following through with that all the time. And the question by Sarah Lambert is, how do we fight this? This hiring just for the image. Maybe Koheili, you can answer this question.
I think Rachel had her hand up. I think she wanted to say something.
Sorry, Rachel, go ahead. And
Yeah, I was just going to say, I remember in grad school, when people were applying to get the GRFP kind of fellowship, that's the outside of the US, that's the NSF graduate research fellowship. You're supposed to include broader impacts. And I remember specific students who did get the GRFP say all these great things that they were going to do, like teach someone in the Middle East about things that there was no way that this was ever going to happen. And they ended up getting these fellowships, and none of that ever happened. So I think people think that you can just say you're going to do things and sound good, but we need to start holding people accountable, asking what you did. I mean, I know these things get buried in kind of NSF annual reports, and people don't think they're going to be checked up on because we don't know what our peers are necessarily saying that they're doing to say that, oh, they're not doing them. But I think there should be some accountability. We have to show results with our science when we get money and grants, and people should have to show not necessarily, positive results, but at least that they are doing what they said they were going to do at a minimum. So,
And yeah, another area. I mean, the grants is one example. Another example now is what's been going on over the last few weeks or so, following the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. What's been going on is you have all of these institutions, all these departments, every center you can name, every organization you can think of, coming out with statement after statement after statement. But I have yet to see one where they've actually done something. So it's an issue, and yes, some of them definitely have the intention that they will do something. So that's very heartening to see that they're actually developing plans on what to do. But the sad reality for many people, unfortunately, is that they feel like they need to put out a statement simply because it looks good. It's going to make them look good, and they're more concerned about looking good than about the actual racism going on. And I think, I read this quote from, I think it was Trevor Noah, who said that, he was talking about, state of race relations in America, where he said that people get more upset when they're perceived as a racist than they do about the actual racism itself. And I think that's a really succinct way to describe the attitude that many people have, many institutions have towards the statements that they keep putting out, that they want to be perceived as not racist, but they're not so worried about whether they actually do something or not. And I think in terms of addressing this, it totally, I mean, the people of the institution, the scientists, the faculty, the staff, the students, the postdocs, there is definitely a responsibility to talk to the management about it, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to decide what gets done and what doesn't get done. So it would be up to the people, the scientists, the students and staff, to actively have these conversations with the management and basically, as Rachel put it, hold them accountable.
thank you, Koheili.
Thank you.
Ria to maybe share some experience from Japan, because in Japan, actually, there was, as she explained in the morning session, there was a top-down decision that the government made, the education component of the government, to increase diversity, or specifically women representation in the geosciences by 2020. Ria, you mentioned up to 20%. So tell us how that worked or didn't work, and what were the reactions from your colleagues?
Okay. the government may set up a goal as or making decision position until 2020. So female percent have to be 30%. But mostly, so university, national university or institution is follow the government set up decision, but the society actually recognize importance of such encouragement, increasing up female or diversity ratio. And JPGU try to made effort to, for example, they only 20% female members, but JPGU tried to giving an award to more female membership. So, but other geoscience society, for example, Geological Society of Japan, is not so doing well. So, because government decision or top down push or stress has no permission. What you say? Only say what you say is advertise. Nothing punishment or something. So it's not so effective. Just try to many society or government or institute, national university try to do that, but failed. But it's okay. So it's a.
So there's
yes.
no way to follow through because there's no implications if they don't follow the rules.
Yeah. So well, improvement some, but not so much. Yeah. So
thank you, Ray. There's a question or a comment from one of the text messages here or questions by Musawi Roy, and he has some suggestions about some concrete ideas like nominating people from underrepresented communities to awards, highlighting their work in Wikipedia, having them selected for guest speakers and so on. And this is actually a note to say that all of this is true. We really have to be proactive. We can't complain that there is no diversity and do nothing about it. It's not enough to say, oh, I think there is diversity. We have to walk the walk. And one of, at least for me now at this stage of my career, when I am sitting on a lot of the search committees and boards and so on, and kind of demanding that we show progress would be something that is very important. So thank you, Musaumi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name well for all of these ideas.
There is actually one question in this direction, is that are there any strategy or advice on how to integrate diversity, inclusion, and intersectionality into the regular discussion in a research-focused environment? I think this is an important point if where we can discuss it, and I think Koeheli, you have it in your talk that there is different strategy. Sometimes it's really difficult to start discussion about races or how you will start. So can you give any advice about the strategies?
Yeah, I mean, well, for one, right now, we need to definitely make the most of this current opportunity, this national moment that we're all in, where suddenly these conversations about race and racism have, are elevated and heightened, and everyone's talking about it. So we need to make sure we don't let that die down and use that as a segue into these conversations. I think what has to happen is we need to be able to have these conversations, like for example, if I use the example of say search committees, you need to have a diversity advocate for every single search committee who's going to bring up these issues of race, of gender, of intersectionality. So for example, at Lamont, I serve as the diversity advocate on search committees, and there are times that I have to keep pointing out things that otherwise people might not necessarily have noticed. You know, for example, when letters come in, and some of these letters, they praise a candidate only because that candidate is exactly like them. And so then I have to point out to the search committee, do you see the affinity bias in these letters? Because these letters are just saying, oh, wow, this guy's great. And, you know, I'm going to retire next year and this guy can take my place. Like, so the whole thing is built on how closely you already mirror who's there. So these conversations, you know, introducing race in, and then when you look at intersectionality, in particular, women of color, and even within women of color, Black women in academia tend to face the most biases, intellectual stereotypes, threats, and biases. These are not easy conversations to have, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. We have to have them. So even if it means making some people uncomfortable, I mean, keep in mind, those of you who've read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, the baseline on which academia rests is white comfort. And so the fact that you're even going to have a conversation about race, of course it's going to upset people. Of course it's going to make people uncomfortable. But that's the whole point. You need to be able to push enough people to be uncomfortable enough to talk about race. Because unless they're able to do that, you can put out as many statements as you want. You can label yourself as good a person as you want. You're not going to get any real change.
Yeah, that's so true. This is exactly what Andrea was talking yesterday in her plenary. So we need to be active anti-racist. So that's very true. Like we have one question. It actually was the first question in from audience from John Doherty, and it's very interesting. And I think many of us would have this question. And he's writing about field study and that he's disconnected with indigenous community, and what is actually the strategy to start the communication, to hear their thoughts and to involve them. Maybe Rosie, you can take it.
Yeah, so we developed a guidance document, which I'll share in the Discord app, called Kulana no I'i, which is research standards. And it's actually not a checklist. And I think it's incredibly important because there is no clear checklist for if I just do X, Y, and Z, this is how I will be, you know, properly engaged. I think it actually takes, here's one of the problems. The problem is that many local communities, not just indigenous communities, local rural communities, operate on timescales that do not match the timescales of academia, right? If you have a community that is really invested in caring for, you know, an estuary or a river, that's a multi-generational commitment. And scientists are working on 3-year timelines. Let's renew the grant. Let's get my grad student, master's student out. Let's publish the paper. So it is really, really important for us as scientists to remember that we're part of a larger society that operates on different timelines, and to realize our positionality. Secondly, it's really important for us to realize that oftentimes what universities represent can be extraordinarily controversial in terms of what are the harms that universities, scientists, and different fields of science have had on communities. When I think of geoscience, you know, yes, we're fighting for climate change, but we're also potentially, you know, the scientists that are providing information on drilling or fracking. Those can be, you know, those juxtapositions can be extraordinarily difficult to resolve for communities. So I think one of the most important things is it takes time. It takes the realization that you cannot rush and expect, you know, not everybody's. I think one of the things is that in academia, we're used to people emailing us last minute and being like, hey, can you write me this letter of support that says I can use your instrument or my student can, you know, come to your university. That's just not how it works in universities. And we cannot, in communities, and we cannot expect to have a warm reception in these communities when we go into these spaces and have these kinds of expectations. relationships have to be built. They have to be reciprocal and not extractive. We have to be investing in building the capacity of these students, because the youth that are engaging potentially could be future scientists. So there is actually no easy answer, but what I would say is the most important ingredient is time and humility.
Thank you, Rosie. That's a great answer. Want to shift gears a little bit here and maybe ask Marjorie to answer this question. Barbara Dutroux asked or mentioned something about whether we have to include K through 12 or younger, start early on in fostering love for the geosciences in order to see any change. And I know you have some programs relevant, so maybe you can share your opinion about maybe geosciences in the classroom and K through 12 involvement as the means to increase diversity.
Right. I think there's all kinds of opportunities that we could take better advantage of in trying to infiltrate the K through 12 with more young people that are success stories in the geosciences. And some of what we've tried to do is capitalize on students who not only want to do the research, but they also do want to have outreach as part of their portfolio because they have a heart for it and they think that it's an important way for them to give back. So there are some programs that actually support students to go into the classrooms. This, prior to the COVID, this was something that a lot of the science teachers really appreciated because it's difficult for them to often come up with curriculum. And many of our graduate students have great ideas on how to do engaging activities with youth. And it's somebody that's closer to their age group versus an older professor. And the students have a lot of enthusiasm and just do a fantastic job. And being part of a fellowship is a way to reward their efforts. So I think that that's one thing that's important. There's other ways that are kind of a little bit more subtle. And one of my friends is a canopy biologist. And she's actually worked pretty hard to develop role models. And she's had a Barbie doll that is fashioned after her, showing somebody who is of mixed descent and wearing the clothes of what an ecologist actually wears, and there's a Barbie doll that looks just like her. And even those kinds of things help show that there can be diverse people that can have successful careers in the geosciences or in biology. And one of the speakers this morning talked about the importance of having people connect what a profession is or what a long-term career might be like by actually having some of these types of role models.
Thank you, Margie. Asmaret, maybe if Maria, can you unmute Margaret Thorne if she's still there, and maybe she can ask her question directly, and Asmaret, you can take a try to answer that.
Sure.
Let me see, Margaret. I think, Margaret, can you please raise your hand? Margaret, I see you. I just yeah, I unmute you. Okay. Yeah, it's not working somehow. Okay, now, Margaret.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you all for the wonderful panel this morning and this afternoon. And several of you mentioned the importance of mentoring, and I'm interested in how institutions or societies can help create mentoring opportunity so people don't have to only do it of their own initiative. And the Early Career Network of the Biogeosciences section in AGU is planning to launch a mentoring and peer support or peer network program starting this fall, and I'm working with them on that. So I wanted to know, would you possibly share any suggestions or advice or experience? How can we and others make our mentoring efforts really successful, inclusive, vibrant, so on? Thank you. And go ask Merit. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
Sorry, Esmeralda, can I also add that maybe Rosie will also add, as she's director of mentoring program. So
Thank you.
sorry, thank you.
Cool. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think mentoring, the right mentoring makes the world a difference. And I mentioned in my own personal case, I think if I didn't have the mentors that I ended up having in my PhD, I don't think I would be here talking to you today, or I would not have even graduated. And with that in mind, a lot of the work that I kind of gravitated towards based on my own personal experience early on, and that has kind of stood the test of time when it comes to mentoring. The thing that comes to mind when I think about these issues is this idea of a mentoring network, right? Is making sure that we're empowering early career scientists to be able to seek out a network of people that can mentor them and sponsor them across many different stages in our career. Right? There's sometimes this temptation, especially in STEM fields, that we put all our eggs in one basket, right? When it comes to one mentor, one PI, that we hitch our, everything that we've got in our careers to, and especially if that doesn't work, that could be problematic. Or at the very least, one individual, even if they're the best kind of mentor that they are, just can't be there for us in every way that we need mentoring and sponsoring. So having mentoring teams, I think, works wonderfully well, in particular when we actually show people this idea behind these mentoring maps and empowering people to be in charge of their own mentoring. So these are approaches that were developed by Carrie Ann Rockmore and the National Center for Faculty Diversity, where the whole point is basically you put the early career scholar in the middle and you identify multiple areas that they need mentoring and sponsoring on, and then you help them figure out who are the right people that can provide those kinds of supports, mentoring and sponsoring. And if we can, we could also help even connect folks with those individuals that they could benefit from. Sometimes these are role models. Sometimes these are people who have the kind of jobs we're hoping to get, right? The positions that we're aspiring to reach. Sometimes they are traditional research mentors. Sometimes they're peer mentors that could read, the 20th version of your writing sample before you have to submit it. All of these things that are important. And so to me, this idea of empowering early career scholars to be in charge of their mentoring, where they're at the center, supported by multiple people, teams of mentors, that are there for them for different stages in their training and early career phases in particular, but even beyond, makes a world of difference. And this is an approach that the Earth Science Women's Network, for example, has been working with for many years. I'm happy to share with Margaret or others interested resources on this idea afterwards.
Rosie?
Yes, we use many of the strategies that Esmeralda was talking about, particularly the mapping out and sitting with the students and kind of envisioning. A lot of the mentoring that I do is for undergraduates, but I also have my own lab that we kind of do this in. But for undergraduates, one of the things that we do, because we form both near peer, so they're being paired with graduate students, is that, and oftentimes they're at the community colleges, so they haven't really even made the transition to commit to the four-year institution. We find it to be incredibly important to immerse the mentor in their mentee's experience and vice versa. So we really encourage the mentor to go to the community college, to really to have in the course of meeting with the student over the semester, we say go to meet with them at the community college, understand what their lived experience is, and then we ask the mentor to invite the student that they're mentoring to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Show them around your lab so that they can actually have a one-on-one experience of someone bringing them into the research space and showing them in a very personalized way. So that's one of the key things that we do. Of course, this is in a much smaller setting than a national mentoring network, but for us, because our numbers are so small, and it's so important for us to create a nurturing environment, so it incorporates both the mentor, but what we also think of as the nest, and that kind of holds all of these and these students in the cohort together. So that's what we're working on. And we also work on training the mentors to how to be better mentors. So we have mentor only activities where we kind of have both structured kind of, you know, these are some tips that you can do. We put together resource packets so that the mentors who are mentoring undergrads have this awareness of what are the timelines for summer internships. You know, get your students ready to apply in February for things that are coming up in the summertime. You know, in January, you need to be getting them to be doing their CVs so that, you know, and then also everything from, are they confused about FAFSA? Are they confused about financial aid? Just getting the students aware. A lot of it is exposure to these, how the culture of academia works, right? There's timelines of, if you want to apply for NSF, what kind of timelines, if you want to apply for grad school. We help the mentors get that information to their students about if you are very interested in working in a research lab, what's the best way to approach somebody? So these are the little things that we invest a lot of time in training the mentors so that they can have that experience with the students of being able to pass on the information. For the mentors themselves who are grad students, we also work on having them think about their own mapping out what they can do. And then we also kind of sneak in little things like, oh, are you and your advisor having individualized mentoring plans? Have you guys discussed what your particular career path is? And not saying that we are mentoring them, but kind of sneaking in some best practices that they can be maybe pushing with their advisor. So these are some of the practices that we are trying to establish at various stages. Our mentoring program is really like a wraparound service of taking a student all the way from community college, what are they doing in the summer program, trying to direct them into an RU program, and so on and so forth.
Maybe Ray can chip in a little bit, because I think mentoring is something we talk a lot about in the US, and it's not necessarily something that is common in other cultures or other countries. I was wondering if you can say, you said there are no role models. Is there any organized program in Japan that fosters mentoring in the geosciences? And if there's anyone in the audience from China, for example, maybe you can raise your hand and share as well. Yeah, if you turn your mic on and talk about mentoring.
Mentoring? Yeah, JPGU and also Geological Society of Japan or academia has no such a mentoring system. However, university has each university has a mentoring system, but in Japan not so well work. So mentee and mentoring, it's we have a system for encouragement of young researcher, also young female empowerment for young female scientists. However, it is difficulty so to get good mentor teacher for us, because the system is not so familiar for Japanese society. So mostly used to be such a mentor-mentee system is a male dominant system, society system. So include diversity, so foreigners, wide nationality, employee, scientists, also female scientists. So in my society, it is not so good work as a mentoring system now. But for me, it's a role model. The exposure of good role model is important. So just try to so increasing the number of good mentor, female or a wide nationality, a role model. So yeah, that's all.
Kohiri, I think you wanted to say something. No.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just briefly say something that One thing that worked very efficiently at some of these professional society meetings is to have these cohorts. And we did this with the On to the Future program for the Geological Society of America. And having cohorts of some of the diverse students go through the whole meeting together as a cohort, as a group that is experiencing everything together, they built up a lot of great friendships. We also had the opportunity for them to have just one-time, one-on-one mentors with people that are just at the meeting, but many of them have continued the relationship beyond the meeting. So I think as much as societies can try to set up something at the meetings itself where it involves mentorship and positive experiences, it'll be very beneficial. And other students can see that there's other people in their discipline that are just like them.
Mm.
That's really nice. Thank you, Margie. Rocio, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, tagging on to what Marjorie just said, I like the idea of having systems and specific programs. In GeoLatinas, that's something that we have been doing. Now we're taking a little break and revamping our mentoring programs, but something that also I think goes hand in hand, and perhaps to answer part of the question that was posed at the beginning, is that, you know, it kind of has to also be part of the culture. So if you make your members accessible, you know, maybe they're not, you know, labeled as mentors, but everybody is part of the same community, and you feel like as a newcomer or an early career, you can come to any of those people informally or formally through a program. You know, that's another way to make it part of the culture that we're all in this together. That's something that we also do in our organization, GeoLatinas, and it's basically that every time we have, you know, an orientation meeting or a new members meeting, we open up with that. You know, this is a network, this is a community, a support system. And so, you know, even if you're not assigned to someone as a mentee or someone as a mentor, you can come to, it's like we have an open door policy. You can come to us, you can message each other via Slack. Just the fact that we are part of the same organization opens the door to that connection and that potential relationship. And so for the biogeosciences, you know, they're starting a program, they have something set up, but it would also be helpful to insert it as part of the culture, that we are all there for each other. And then that way, you know, it's maybe a little bit like breaking the ice as well and setting up the system.
That's a great point. And I think this is something what Koeheli was also talking about, changing the climate. And Asmeret was also talking about this, like we need to change completely the climate in society or departmental. And regarding this, we have a question about, unfortunately, Brandon is not here. That's maybe a question for him, because efforts and programs can be very expensive. And is there any low-hanging fruit that is immediate thing society can do? Is there something which we can connect with idea from Rocio and Margie was talking about, virtual communities or societies? Is there something we can immediately take action? So that is also what we are saying. There's so many words, but not so many actions. And maybe now this is a point where we can really create something where we can act. Margie, maybe you can say something about this, but the cost of programs and efforts in societies.
There is a cost of programs, and there's typically staff time that's required. But quite honestly, if it's monies that are supporting diversity and students, that is often something that donors are more willing to support. And that's one thing we found for the GSA program. And I have to say, another thing that I think is really important is oftentimes we underestimate the power of students. And particularly in academia, they are our audience, they're the client, they're the customer. And when they speak out, sometimes it gets a lot more notice than if faculty said the same thing. And so the students, I think if we can get more of them represented on committees and give them a voice in the organization itself, you know, really it's an investment in the future, because the students are the one sector of these professional societies that actually is going to stay steady and might potentially grow in the future. And if we don't invest in those young people, there isn't going to be much of a future, for these societies. So I think it's self-preservation.
So our time is almost ending. I think we have 4 more minutes, and some of the panel members are in New York, so it's really late there. They have little kids running around. So I want to just finish with one last question for all the panelists. And if you had a wish for Goldschmidt 2022, that's going to be in Hawaii in 2 years, of something that we can do to change the face of the meeting and the geochemical societies that they support this meeting, maybe you can raise that up. And as a community, maybe us and everybody else who's listening or tuning in can make a commitment that we'll try really hard to fulfill this wish. So why don't we start with Margie, Rachel, Rosie, Rocio, Rie, Koheli, and then Asworth. Margie, unmute yourself.
Was I supposed to start? I'm not sure what can we do for 2022? Wow, we can make our best effort to bring in diverse scientists, and maybe there's a way for Goldschmidt to provide extra funds to support particularly young people that can come and really get engaged in the meeting and broaden their horizons as well. I'll pass on.
Perfect, thank you. Rachel.
I don't know. I think more, what I would like to see is more invited talks going to more diverse people, also, in the science sections, not just in the diversity session. That probably involves money and providing money because a lot of early career people only have funding to maybe go to one conference a year. And Hawaii is not a cheap destination. So yeah, I would like to see more diverse invited speakers and money going to them.
Full support. Thank you, Rachel. Rosie.
Okay, so I'm just going to deviate, but I would like the conference organizers to consider the implications of why they want to have the conference in Hawaii and how they will authentically engage with the indigenous community who has a thousands-year-long accumulated knowledge of geosciences, rather than hosting a conference that might maybe have a romanticized version of a tourist destination.
That's a fantastic comment, Rosie. In fact, just to share something that never happened because we went virtual, but we actually communicated with a lot of local organizations. We've had invited all of the schools to participate for free and had sessions for school members and community members. And if you have any suggestions that are more specific, we can have more details and discussions on that. And Ken Rubin was particularly influential in trying to integrate the place with the meeting. So we'll keep working on that, I'm sure. Thank you. Rocio.
That's a good question, and thank you, Rosie, for asking that question too. I was a little confused, like, wasn't it just in Hawaii? Why is it coming back? Maybe that's the place to have it. I think 2 years is plenty of time to make all of the guidelines for planning the conference, executing the conference in an accessible way, transparent. So maybe echoing what Koheli said, if there's a website where they say these are the guidelines that we give our session conveners, to make sure that we do have the invited speakers be who we want to be, you know, have them present their diverse science. And as Rachel mentioned, also putting some money towards that, because if it's going to be in Hawaii, then it's not an affordable place for many of us from diverse backgrounds, especially early career scientists. And so I think that that's a good goal to have, you know, being transparent enough to have your plans for your conference 2 years down the line, or, you know, a couple of years almost, online, and maybe even open it to the critical, constructive criticism from the members, and offer some guidance on, yes, this is accessible enough for different, you know, people in different stages of their careers, and this is how else you can make it better.
Thank you, Rocio. Bria, what would you like to see in 2022 in terms of diversity and inclusion? We can't hear you. There.
Can you hear? Oh, yeah, thank you. So, yes, 2022 next. So we run the new system online. So for diversity, I think including for much more young attendance. So a network system is good for system for encourage to attendance more, encourage the attendance of young researcher. So I think it's a, and also so if the people difficulty attendance so to the conference, so easy way to using a network. So please think about mixture. Next, Goldschmidt. Actually, Goldschmidt registration at attendance fee little bit expensive for scientists. So think about that for much more wide diversity. So maybe good system for using a mixture of networking and also conference system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Haley, any suggestions of what we can do?
Yeah, there are two immediate things that come to mind. One is, you know, going on the thing of invited speakers, making sure that they're diverse invited speakers, but more specifically, you know, like how I think it was maybe a couple of years ago, they coined the term manel, and they said if it's an all male panel, then the panelists should ask, is it a manel, and refuse to join. And I think something similar should be done for people of color for, you know, for the next Goldschmidt conference, where it's not just enough to give conveners guidelines, because you can give them all the guidelines you want. If they're not genuinely committed, they're just going to say, oh, we couldn't find a person of color. You know, put it on all the members, all the other panelists, all the, you know, all the attendees, whoever's been asked to speak on a panel, say, can I know the full composition of the panel? How many people of color are on that panel? And so when conveners are asked that question, they have to give an answer. So that was my first point. The second point is pretty close to what Rosie was saying. One, given the location that, you know, that it's Hawaii and the involvement of indigenous groups, but also I think when you look at the bigger picture, I mean, climate change is one of the biggest like defining issues of our generation, and that falls under geosciences. And so when you look at, you know, the involvement of indigenous groups and stakeholders and how crucial that is, you can't have a geoscience conference without taking into in a region, in a place like Hawaii, without going all out to make absolute, you know, the maximum possible connections you could possibly make with the local community there.
Thank you. And last but not least, Asmaret, are you still with us there?
I'm here. Yeah, and I think between everyone, amongst everybody in the panel, they've said a lot of the ideas I would have highlighted. And just to kind of amplify a couple of the points and voices that we heard, right? There's always a really huge need to make sure that our invited speaker lineups for the science talks, and in particular for the named lectures and special recognitions with awards, are not just going to members of the majority, right? And that's a relatively easy, low-hanging fruit in many ways. We just have to make sure who we're reaching out to, and then making sure that a diverse set of nominees are being presented for different awards. Some societies have gone as far as to make sure that if the, or at least they're discussing, I should say, if the people that are nominated do not represent the diversity of their community, they will not start evaluating the nominations. This is a similar approach that universities are now taking to hiring and recruitment efforts too, right? And so it's making sure that if we're ending up with 2 people nominated for a major award when there should have been 20, then stop and ask the question of what happened here. Do we need to extend the deadline and reach out to a larger community of folks? Ethics is a big one, I think, in many ways, making sure that we have ethics guidelines that govern climate in our academic communities, but also establish codes of conduct that we expect how we expect people to act in these meetings, in these professional spaces, and how we expect people to treat each other to ensure that everybody can freely attend these meetings with, again, free of discrimination and harassment. And the other major one that I think obviously costs money is to support early career scholars to make a presence. And in particular, in this case, I think postdocs tend to fall through the cracks a lot of times, and people that are between PhDs and tenure track positions, so either in lecture, visiting appointments, and things like that, right? They fall through the cracks, but there's so much diversity and talent in that pool of scholars that if we can figure out a way to make sure that they can participate, we're right there tapping into a pretty diverse community of scholars.
Fantastic. And I hope all of you and everybody else who's online with us and has participated in the morning will chip in to make all of this happen. So stay tuned and hope to see you all in Hawaii in 2022. And thank you again for all our panelists. If anybody's still around, let's give them a clap and continue the discussion on the Discord channel. Bye, everybody, and have a good day or good night wherever you are. And thank you, Maria, for doing this. Bye.
Thank you for organizing.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye.